I went into this season wanting to try the new hero Rosa, and needing a pretty good build for her. So my early idea was to use the Lightning Beam skill. That still looks awesome. I'm definitely going to be exploring it in the future. If you want to see how that goes, well, I guess you'll just have to get subscribed since I don't know quite when that'll be. But I also knew that Lightning Beam wasn't available from level 1, and Groundshaker is a really good skill, which is available on Rosa from level 1. So I played Groundshaker Rosa, kind of loosely following Milky's guide at first, but then making my own adjustments to move her from less of a burst damage class to more of a reliable DPS character, since I highly value reliability, especially once I got a little bit past the point where I could one-shot everything. Though admittedly, if I was a little less lazy about hitting my buttons, I probably could go back to one-shotting. So if you want to play the new hero Rosa, High Court Chariot, and prefer brain-off leveling to high-effort button presses, then this could very well be the perfect build for you. I'm going to start by going over some of the major changes I made to the build, as opposed to Milky's version on max roll. After that, I'm going to get into my talents, gear, etc., before finishing off with what I've done on the character so far. Spoiler alert, I'm farming Time Mark 7 very easily, progressing towards Time Mark 7 Traveler. I've had zero issues clearing the Nightmare, and the build's pretty darn fast. But for now, let's get into some of the changes. First up, I opted into Instant Smash, because I have other ways to generate fervor, and as it turns out, Instant Smash is really good since I'm a pure physical damager, almost pure, there's a little erosion in there, but we're not counting that. Physical damage build, therefore enemy armor can be a problem, and completely negating it means you hit much, much harder. I've also gone back and forth between Blunt and Ambition. On the one hand, Blunt is pretty okay, but it makes it a little more difficult to one-shot enemies. And Ambition is another way to get fervor generation as opposed to endless fervor. You give up some crit, though you're still able to get enough to pretty much cap, I found. On the other hand, that means enemies don't have the 25% injury buffer, so they just straight get one shot more often. The other major change is that my Fixate and Bull's Rage are supported by Rhythm and Pain Amplification instead of Mania. So their powers are much less potent when active, but they're active almost all the time. This is what I meant by reliable damage as opposed to burst DPS. If you're following Milky's build, the correct way to play is charge into an enemy, pop Fixate, Bull's Rage, and your trait skill. So 3 buttons, then drop a Groundshaker, and you should pretty much one-shot everything. And when I was doing that correctly, I was getting absolutely massive crits, far larger than what I'm getting now. But I had to press those buttons for every single enemy, which is a little bit unfortunate. So what I've decided to do instead is just not press those buttons. And when I start fighting bosses that live a little longer, for those boss encounters such as Watchers or such as Pinnacle bosses, I'm simply going to swap Rhythm support out for Mass Effect, giving me those large, highly effective bonuses without actually having to deal with it from the minute-to-minute gameplay. Aside of that, I've pretty much just followed what Milky did, because I wanted something easy and I didn't want to think too hard. My plan is still to play the build for a little bit longer, get to the point where I can easily farm currency, farm up enough, and swap to Lightning Beam. Now, for most of my early game progression, I was just using trash that I found on the floor. However, as I was approaching Time Mark 7, I took a little bit, spent the 100 or so FE that I had farmed up to that point, and upgraded my gear a bit. My items are certainly not perfect, in fact many of them are quite bad, and some of them are okay. Just keep that in mind, and with a little bit of effort, you should be able to get decent results. Up until Time Mark 6, I was literally wearing trash that I picked up around level 30. So first up, I have God of War. For the major talents, Brutality is a must. It's 35% additional damage, and you're not going to be dealing elemental damage anyway. If you wanted to go an elemental Groundshaker build, technically you can take a lot of the similar choices, but you'll need to use Determined. Then I have Instant Smash, so that my critical strikes ignore enemy armor. You need a very high critical strike rating, otherwise you should go with Endless Fervor for having Fervor and gaining the Fervor effect. In terms of individual points, I'm trying to invest into crit and damage, then grabbing this for a little bit of paralysis chance, and rounding things out with a bit of extra life and armor. I did experiment going into the legendary medium talent for a 10% chance to restore 10% of life and energy shield and mana while blocking, but ultimately didn't find the proc to be reliable enough. Then in Shadow Dancer, I'm currently using Ambition as my fervor generator, Plus, of course, open wounds because it's super overpowered. You'll pretty much always have trauma on enemies, so you get the 125% crit damage almost for free. Then coming through, this is merely for the skill cost. Milky went for 2 points. I found 3 to feel a little bit better. Coming over here, extra crit stuff. A little bit of extra crit damage, but I'm not too worried about it since I have the extra 125. Some attack block chance, minus additional fizz taken. Progressing all the way to here, +1 fizz skill level. Groundshaker is a fizz skill, so that works quite well. And for the rest of the points, I was just rounding out defenses and quality of life, with cooldown recovery speed to make sure my buffs are active more often than not. Then in Ranger, I'm pretty sure I just copied almost everything that Milky did. Right now, I have been using Fluke, because after dropping Endless Fervor, I didn't quite have a way to cap out my crit without it. So I'm going for the Lucky Effect. This is it rolls twice and takes the best result, though Gravity is pretty darn similar and reverses knockback direction, so you pull enemies towards yourself. This kind of feels like a hit a dummy for a few minutes and see how many yellow numbers you get, or personal choice based on how things feel. The really nice thing about Ranger is it gets you a lot of extra crit damage, and it gets you awesome talents like this for 8% additional damage. And even more crit damage right here, plus some fervor effect for more crit strike rating. Another alternative is, instead of using Impending, you could use Keep It Up if you need it to crit cap. On my slates, I am using Self-Found Garbage. Yes, I do have some very shiny legendary slates here. I bought these, but because I wanted to talk about my raw early game experiences, I haven't equipped them yet, so I don't even know if they're good. They're just kind of some less expensive slates that I want to experiment with later. And who knows, you might see them featured in a future video. So here I've got a little bit of sealed mana, some attack damage. This slate I actually rolled because it was pretty good. This slate just has fervor effect on it. And this slate I rolled because the fizz damage to spells and attacks is really good. So here are my main skills. I've got Groundshaker, which does 186% weapon damage, consumes a demo charge, and makes a gigantic fissure with 930% of weapon damage. It's linked to quick return because you really want that demo charge restoration speed. Melee knockback for a pretty juicy multiplier. Steamroll for an even juicier one. Devastator, because you do most of your damage when it is consuming a demo charge. And physical damage, because this shiny new support adds a lot of base damage and it's really good in low gear. Realistically, I could probably drop this at this point. While my gear is pretty good, it's not great, and it could very well be that this is best. But alternatively, something like Mark support might end up performing better. I'd just have to test it, and I haven't gotten around with it, because if it ain't broke, you don't fix it. Then I've got Spiral Strike, which I am using to mark, and harden myself for additional defenses. Compound Potion, using the new Limber Stretch, because I really like having the movement speed. There's really no other reason to put this here. Residues, so it can't be removed when you reach full life. And also Armor Infusion. That way it provides a pretty stable amount of healing. Realistically, this could be changed to Emergency Restoration. That's just personal preference. I had Residues on. I've gone back and forth, which is why I have a level 14 Emergency Restoration lying around. Or maybe you splash out on the energy and get all 4. Next up I have Bull's Rage with cooldown reduction, extended duration, and rhythm. Normally, you have a massive mana cost, which is converted to a massive life cost, which is pretty darn awkward. Now, to get around that, you'd need to use something like self-sacrifice. The good news is, with rhythm, it's triggered rather than self-use. Therefore, you don't need to worry, you don't pay any costs for triggered skills. And as long as the cooldown and duration line up, you can have Bull's Rage up permanently. I'm not quite there yet, but it's really darn close. Another way to do this would be to link it to Euphoria on hit, where it constantly refreshes on kill. I'm also using Fixate. I'm linking it with Rhythm, Pain Amp, Extended Duration, and Cooldown. It's probably a waste of energy to extend it that much, but it's another good way to make sure that the target is marked and get a little bit of extra double damage. Then coming over to my auras, I've got them all here. Weapon Amp, you get additional fizz and additional attack speed. Alternatively, you can use Fearless. This gives crit strike rating, additional crit strike damage and melee skill area. Acuteness Imbue is really important. This is how you get trauma on enemies. You really, really need Acuteness Imbue. And Summon Flame Spirit for the crit. If your crit's good, it'll actually feel really, really good to swap this to Summon Lightning Spirit instead. But I'm not there yet, especially because of some of the changes I talked about earlier. This is something really new, an auto defense setup with Frost Shield and Seal conversion. I have not tried this yet. This is the next step because I felt like it was about time to add a defensive skill. I'm not sure if Frost Shield is even correct. I'm going to be looking through the defensive skills. Maybe I go Delayed Pain, Aegis of Fire, or even Stone Skin. Or maybe I drop all of these and go with the Euphoria on hit instead. And last up, a Curse on hit with Vulnerability. That way, I get the easy extra curse effect, don't have to worry about the area, and can do extra damage to all enemies. I don't have a Soul Candle yet, but anything for Fizz damage, area damage, melee damage, Fizz skill, melee skill, area skill, all those things are good. I just haven't gone into the City of Eterna. Stay tuned for that though, because I might just farm it and make my first 1000 FE that way. Then next up, we have hero items. I'm using this. It's not particularly great, but it's the only second engram slot open and block ratio applied to dot damage while within the Holy Domain relic that I've found. I quite like this because I have a high amount of block ratio, and the attack and spell block chance makes it easier to cap out, though I think I'm overcapped, so that's probably a dead mod. Then we've got Discipline comes last with block ratio and any other mod you can find. Yeah, I haven't thought too hard about these. These are just trash I picked up off the floor. Kind of like the Restores Missing Life and Energy Shield and blocking, though. I'm also trying out a High Quartz Dog Barks. I picked this up very cheaply unidentified and happened to identify a perfect version. Is this worth the price? I don't know. It feels really good to have the charge linked to your main skill or your hero skill. I don't know if it's worth it versus another relic that adds block ratio or adds more damage. But I've been experimenting and I was able to purchase it early. If the price skyrockets, I wouldn't advise it. If it's cheap, try it for yourself and see how you like it. Of course, you have to get charged and ready. I copied Milky and went with Whirlwind Advance. I kind of just don't want to lose all of my murderous intent, so I decided I'll just stick to Whirlwind Advance. This also caps up my spell block, which is really good. Decimate is required. Desperation, you get additional attack and cast speed, and then additional damage based on how much murderous intent you have, which is why I don't want to lose it. Right now, I sit at around 150 a lot of the time, which is quite a bit of additional damage. I did try a little bit of this, that if no enemies have been killed recently, you get a ton of bonuses. If you want to swap to this for Watchers, it's absolutely insane, but you don't want to wear it in general mapping. And last up, there's Seize the Momentum for Brave Advance, where you get movement speed and some additional damage taken and 4% damage to enemies in Holy Domain. Feels pretty good, might make me a little too squishy later, but if so, I'm just going to swap to Crush and make sure to stack all that juicy block ratio for all the murderous intent. Okay, so here's my gear. First up, this helmet. I bought a sealed mana helmet, and then I just spammed it until I got demo charge restoration speed. I don't think you actually need sealed mana on a helmet. I wanted to try an auto defense setup, which is why I opted into this, but you could just go with demo charge restoration speed, then get life, armor, or resistances. I picked up a Sky Devourer strength armor just because it happened to be inexpensive due to the low energy. It feels pretty darn good to get the extra skill damage and radius, plus have life, but long term I'm going to be replacing this with something else. I also got Demo's Charge Restoration Speed on an Onslaughter's Amulet. The stats are garbage, but at least I did manage to roll into Tier 1 Erosion Resistance. I'll keep you updated on what I end up crafting here, or I might go with a Vortex for additional area damage. Then on my gloves, I wanted the life regain from Ranger's Rusted Gauntlets. They were very, very cheap, and I spam crafted them until I got something okay. Managed to hit this in one, by the way, so I'd call it worth. Again, you should look for adds fizz damage to attacks and life as a prefix, whatever you can get as the suffixes, maybe even block ratio as a prefix. My belt is literally just to cap out my resistances. It's garbage. And remember when I said I'm wearing trash from a floor? Yeah, I meant stuff like this. Not all of my gear is very good right now. For boots, I bought high movement speed because gotta go fast. Spam them a little bit. I needed fire res, so that worked out. And a little bit of max life I'm not going to complain about. Now this ring I got lucky. You do not need a graceful ring. You don't need life. You can easily get resistances here. But I happened to get this one. It was relatively inexpensive at a little bit under 20 FE. And then I landed the fizz damage to attacks and spells. You want that and as many defensive modifiers as you can get. Personally, I would say Hero's Gaze is a really good legendary item to have on this build. You get 5% additional attack damage for every attack blocked, which means you'll have about 30% additional attack damage most of the time. Then you also get the free triggered focused impact. The fire res and life don't hurt either. Long term, with Dream Interpretation, you can put some of the best mods from Hero's Gaze onto a rare crafted ring, so that would be my long-term plan. For my weapon, I got a reasonably high DPS Hero's Longsword. As you can see, this one has fizz damage and fizz's erosion. Then gear physical damage. It's 0 plasticity, so it will not be crafted further, but it's got gear attack speed and crit strike damage plus chance to deal double damage. All good stats, and I used Dream Interpretation to add 21 to 26 physical damage to the gear. As a warning, this was originally 98. But as it turns out, if you remove or downgrade an affix with Dream Interpretation, then restore it by changing the Dream mod, it redivines the item, and so that's 85%, and I can't fix it without taking off my good fizz. So I'll do that later. Last up, I'm trying the Coward's Choice. This is, again, part of why I'm so over block cap. Honestly, it's just for the armor effective rate. I just really like having the armor effective rate for non-physical mitigation, and the missing life restored on block is pretty good. You do not need this. This is just something that I happened to pick up. In fact, a rare shield is much better because you can get block ratio. So after I spend a little bit more money on other upgrades, I plan to transition into a crafted rare. And for Pact Spirits, I would say just focus on capping out your resistances. After that, go for attack damage or loot bonuses. Right now, I do have the Knight of Pale Blue on, but I'll be honest with you, most of the time, he doesn't do anything while mapping. I just like the way he looks. So what have I done thus far? If you've checked out my live stream, on the first day, I leveled all the way up and got into the Nether Realm. In the second day, I cleared everything up to time mark 7 and did my first Traveler fight. After that, I messed around a bit and overall had plenty of damage even in time mark 7. During this time, I was of course fighting Watchers, and while the build isn't necessarily the best for single target, it does completely fine. Plus, I found it was particularly good at bursting enemies down. I was getting 60 and even 120 mil crits in pretty darn bad gear. Of course, that was when I was manually using both my Bull's Rage and my Fixate. With Mass Effect, it gives a gigantic burst of damage, and then you essentially do no damage until it comes back. What I found is I did not enjoy that playstyle, and I'd rather have to 2 or 3 shot stuff, but have the satisfaction of knowing my overall DPS is about 20% higher. If you're one-shotting enemies, go for the cheesy one-shot strat. If you are not one-shotting enemies anyway, then don't go for the one-shot and use the consistent DPS like I am. I have, of course, also been exploring the Nightmare because it's an extremely rewarding mechanic, and I want to dive into the City of Eterna soon and farm myself some soul candles. Therefore, I'm going to focus on things that help me excel in that content, mainly being really tanky. Luckily, Rosa is quite good at being really tanky, so I don't have any issues with that. Plus, the more I block, the more damage that I'm going to be doing. Most of the time when I'm playing a leveling build, I just completely YOLO it. And this time, I didn't want to, just because sometimes you're really tired after the holidays, want to turn your brain off and blast, which is why I followed the guide laid out by Milky. Unfortunately, I'm really bad at following guides, which is to say I always change stuff, and that's exactly what I did with the Rosa. Personally, I think it's worked out for the better. I like the setup with Instant Smash a lot more, because I don't encounter enemies that are super resistant to my damage. And I like the consistent DPS more, because that way I don't have to worry about one-shotting things or doing no DPS until, well, all my one-shot stuff comes up again. But you might have better results with his setup. And hopefully he'll be making a video soon. Last I checked he hadn't, but we are only basically a day and a half into the season as of when I'm recording this, so it's perfectly understandable if there hasn't been enough time to make a video. It'll probably be more like 2 days once this video comes out. And that leaves the next question. How far can this build go? Can you farm 8/4 deep space? I kind of suspect the answer is yes. Now, while you won't be the highest single target, you are relatively mobile, quite fast, and you have a massive AoE, and you pretty much one-tap Pacts. What this leads into is a single target experience where you might not one-tap the boss unless you do everything perfectly, but the boss won't be one-tapping you either. So you can always set up again, reload, and nuke him on the second try. Currently, my only real weakness is the fact that I haven't capped up my erosion res, so I'm a little vulnerable to that damage type. But for everything else, I'm feeling super tanky, and even when it comes to erosion, with about 10% res, I'm not having that many problems. I'm smoothly farming Time Mark 7 and 7-1, and I'm sure with a little more gear, I'll be able to transition into Time Mark 8. Many of my items, as you saw, have suboptimal mods, or in some cases, barely any mods on them at all, which means there's a lot of room for improvement, and that improvement will bring improved DPS. Oh, and don't worry, I haven't forgotten about Lightning Beam. That's coming up in the future. I'm going to farm the currency, then do a reroll. I don't know if I'll actually be doing it on Rosa. I guess you'll just have to see in the future, because even I don't know right now. With that said, I'm curious. Have you come back to Torchlight Infinite for the Twinightmare season? And if so, how has your season start gone? If you're playing Rosa, are you considering this build, or did you do something else? Let me know all of those thoughts down in the comments below. And of course, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. If you want to help support, you might even see your name on screen, just like these fine folks here. Now, with that said, I guess I have to get back to farming to improve my gear and fix my build. So, thank you again. That's all for me today. Hope you learned something, and I'll see you again sometime soon.